Hey there, Business for Unicorns podcast listeners. This is Mark, and I'm here to tell you about an awesome free resource on businessforunicorns.com. If you ever find yourself feeling frustrated with your training gym because you know that there are all sorts of things you could work on, but you're not really sure how to prioritize, you don't know what's the most important thing to work on or what order you should be tackling your priorities, well, now is the time to go to businessforunicorns.com, click the button, and fill out our free self-assessment. With the Ultimate Training Gym Owner Report Card, you will gain immediate clarity on just where to be focusing your attention to create more positive impact on your community, to drive more revenue and take home income, and to do it all with less stress and more peace of mind. So go to businessofunicorns.com, click the button, fill out that free self-assessment, and start building a business and life you love today.
Fitness business nerds, welcome to another episode of the Business for Unicorns podcast. What's up, my friends? Today I'm here with Pete and Fisher. How you all doing?
Great.
All good in Massachusetts.
Awesome. Today we're actually going to talk about a topic that came up on our recent Unicorn Society retreat in Miami. During Mark's presentation, he presented this idea that there are kind of four main things that everyone on your team should be focused on. And everyone really responded to this idea. So we thought hey, let's talk about it on the podcast, share it with our listeners. And so Fisher, why don't you give everyone a little recap of this concept you introduced in Miami?
Yeah, the first thing I want to say is that what a great example of how often you're surprised by the things that resonate. Because if you two recall, I put this in at the end of my presentation as almost a throwaway bonus. Here's another thing to consider about leadership. And the thing that I have found useful, that I have been drilling with the people I work with, really when you work at a business, there are four things ideally you're doing. And that is, one, making the business more revenue, making more money. Two, saving the business money or reducing expenses. Three, making the clients' lives better. And four, making the team's lives better. Now, the obvious thing to consider is there is a negotiation between those four valuable things. If you want to make your team's lives better, you could give everybody a 10x raise, but that will not do good things for your expenses, and then the business will close, and that will be sad. Conversely, you could make a lot more money if you 10x all your prices, but that will not be good for the clients, and that also will lead to bad things for the business. And this might sound obvious to you if you run a business, because when you are responsible for these things happening, one of the advantages you will often have that I think it's important to appreciate, it will not always be intuitive to the people that you work with, is you likely are incentivized to have a very clear moment-to-moment understanding of what the priority is, of what's most important, and your team won't. So how I have taken to using this framework is I will quiz the people I work with on the leadership team on a regular basis, and then I will sometimes, when they bring forth an idea, I will ask them to clarify for me how they see it navigating those four requirements of anything that we're doing. This is particularly important in the event, I know this doesn't happen so often, my beloved training gym owners, but in the event that there's enough fat on the bone that people start to have time and they start to think of projects and other things that they want to do, then people will sometimes be tempted to do the things that they're interested in doing, that they think are fun, that they're intellectually titillated by, but are not necessarily moving the ball forward by that definition. And I find this to be a very useful teaching tool to help them self-correct and understand that, I don't know, that, spending, I'm making this up, a ridiculous example, spending, thousands of dollars and a week of the team's time to close down the gym because you want the whole team to work together to do a mural together because you think it'd be a really fun team bonding opportunity, and you think that ultimately it will look really cool and the clients will appreciate it. Is the cost of that, is the loss of revenue actually going to meaningfully be returned by the commensurate, in theory, improvement in the team's lives? And it remains to be seen whether something like that would actually be considered a value add or deficit from your team. So kind of a ridiculous example, but one that I think elucidates the point.
Yeah, I think it's a great point, Fisher. And the thing I love about it, and I think the reason, at least my take on why it resonated with our Unicorn Society members so much, was because they're often pulled in so many directions, right? We know most training gym owners wear all the hats, and they're always trying to find some way to assess what hat should I be wearing right now. What are the hats I should be wearing the most often? How do I prioritize all these fucking hats? And that is a really great way to just bring in super sharp focus. Well, are you and your team focused on these 4 things? More revenue, less expenses, better team experience, better client experience. Not that there's not anything else to focus on, but I mean, those are the things that meaningfully grow and change the business for the better. Yeah, so I think that's my take on why it was so resonant, was because it was just kind of a measuring stick to say, okay, what should matter for me in any given moment? And I think it really helps. Yeah, Pete, what's your hot take on this?
Well, first I'll say that I wrote this down when Mark said it first, because it surprisingly resonated with me as well. And I want to clarify our messaging on how and when it came up, because the way Mark packaged this information was actually what he would like to see the people in the room communicate to their chief of staff, or
Yes.
first in kind of their number one, not necessarily the team as a whole. And this isn't me
Good
saying,
distinction.
I'm not telling you not to open up these kind of concepts in the minds of your staff, but I specifically take value from this in the mindset of my number one. So if I say to John, hey, these are the 4 things, and I don't even necessarily need to say them to him, because he seems to be conditioned to think that way anyway, but it's good to kind of reinforce them consistently. But I find that not all of it necessarily needs to be spammed to the entire team. If your team gets bigger and bigger and bigger, it kind of becomes a little bit convoluted if you've got a team of 15 coaches and all
Sure.
of them are asked to be simultaneously looking for ways to reduce expenses or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's just good to have one person who has that in mind as he interacts with the team on your behalf. So that's my first thought. The second thing that comes to mind is that numbers 3 and 4 on this list, and Mark, I get the impression that it was prioritized from top to bottom: increase revenues, decrease expenses, improve the lives of, I believe it was clients first, staff second. I see numbers 3 and 4 on that list, regardless of which order they're in, as they come hand in hand. If I improve clients' lives, it's a better work environment for my employees. If I improve employees' lives, it's a better training experience for my clients. Those 2 concepts are married, and it's important that I kind of focus on both simultaneously. Mark, you look like you have a thought on that.
I have not always found that. In fact, I have often found there to be a really distinct tension that the things that will make the team's lives better is and I'm making up specific examples here, is, it's annoying to me to have to check in with my clients after their first session. It's like, I know it's valuable, it's annoying, I don't want to do it. And that does make the clients' lives better. Conversely, it might make the clients' lives better if you instituted a check-in process where everyone in the team is assigned a certain number of clients in, let's say, a modest training facility. That would, in theory, improve the client experience, but it might be annoying for your team. Now, admittedly, and this is how they all sort of play together, right? Well, then you could say, well, what if I pay the team for it? Then the team's lives might be better. They're making more income. Okay, well, but now your expenses have gone up. Well, true, but then the revenue will increase because our retention will improve. So at any rate, that's not to say what you're saying is incorrect by any means. You caught me like laughing out loud because I have a lot of experiences where, unfortunately, it has felt like it's a little bit of a zero-sum game between the team and the clients. And I love them both. I love them both.
I think that when I look at the times in the past when I've had maybe staff inconvenienced by client support initiatives like you're discussing, the staff was inconvenienced because I didn't do a good enough job of involving them in the decision to integrate that new policy. So it was like I'd stand there from the top and say, I've made this decision. You're all going to do this thing. Sorry, I'm the boss. Take it or leave it. Whereas now I've kind of relinquished nearly all of my power. I show up to staff meetings and I am a eager and willing participant, but being the end all be all final say isn't what it used to be. I'm definitely rowing in the direction of the team. So when we put one of those new rules or regulations in place that's going to increase staff energy into the client support realm, it's because they believe it to be their idea, not mine.
Yes.
Yeah. Well said, my friend.
If I can offer just one thing briefly, and then Kiera, I'd love to get your 2 cents on this. One thing you've highlighted here, Pete, that I think is correct, and I think is a part of this that it's worth emphasizing, is part of the premise of that talk that I gave at this retreat. And by the way, we'll have some extra seats available for the one we do in Portland in June. Do keep your eyes peeled to the Business for Unicorns newsletter, dear listener. The context with which I gave that in was that as a training gym owner, practically speaking, most facilities, you're not going to have a large staff of management. Now, MFF, full disclosure, is an exception to that rule, where there are several people that run facilities, all of which I get to work with. But for most training gyms, I think if the owner wants some freedom and some ability to... Peter, you drinking out of a milk bottle? Is that a baby milk bottle? This podcast is unhinged today. So
I am a meathead. This is protein
thank you.
powder.
Great, perfect. I will not pretend that it's clearly a baby bottle drinking out of a nipple. So if you're looking for real freedom in a training gym and you want to be able to take time off and take vacations, you need to have at least one person that is a strong second in command, that is likely being paid very compensated, very appropriately for the market, likely has some kind of bonus structure. And then the reason that this is, I think, important for your comment, Pete, is I find I now have a similar experience with the trainers because there's a fitness director that is responsible for making those decisions that can, in fact, overrule me if I have an idea that they think is stupid, and that training manager has a credibility that I don't, because they, in addition to running the training team, are on the floor, which means that if the training manager is the one that sources this idea, it's coming from them, it's not coming down from on high, or at the very least, if it's coming down from me, it will never go to the team directly until the person that is considered to be one of their peers takes it as their own and makes the case, if they choose to do that. Or they can also tell me to go to hell if the idea is stupid, which I also will appreciate and be thankful for.
Yeah, that makes sense.
What do you think?
I think I don't know that I have anything to add. I think the thing that kind of has come into sharper focus as we've been talking about it more is that I do think that the best way to use this model, right, this kind of 4 priorities model, is with people you're trying to take from being staff members to managers. Right. I think this is a management training tool at its best to get people who have been really focused on just getting their tasks done and checking the boxes and showing up and doing a good training session and showing up and, opening and closing the space. If you want to move them, and I hear this a lot in our conversations with Unicorn Society members, I just want more people in the business thinking like owners. I want more people in the business taking on more ownership of different parts of the business. And in part, it's to give themselves more freedom as owners. In part, it's to take some things off their plate. I think one of the ways to get them to stop thinking like a staff member who just gets the tasks done and goes home and start thinking more, kind of, I'll put in quotes, like an owner, is to do this, is to get them to think big picture about how the organization functions, to give them the ability to kind of zoom out from their small view of just a few things, to zoom out and see how does the organization function as a system, right? How's the organization function from 10,000 feet? And one of the easiest way to frame that for them is these 4 priorities. Right? When you're at 10,000 feet, the things that come into sharp focus as being the priorities are money in, money out, happy clients, happy staff, right? And when you can give them that kind of framing, it really changes their world from I just show up and deliver a great training session to how am I thinking on a group level or a systemic level? And it's really that level shift in their perspective that I think makes this a really great training tool.
Yeah, one of the best things that has happened to me in the years since appropriately transitioning to compensating a number 2 like this is opening up the books kind of delivered an ally that I needed when it came to decision making. And my number 1, number 2, whatever you want to call them, is a pretty good filter as far as ideas go. And instead of me looking like the stingy bad guy shooting down ideas or saying, no, we can't spend on that, he does it before it even hits my radar because he does have a degree of familiarity. But I think that it's very easy for the team to do some basic math and feel that they have a very good feel for the money in piece. And more often than not, I think they have a extraordinarily vague and misinformed understanding of the money out piece.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just not appropriate to completely open the books to the entirety of the team. I mean, there are delicate compensation factors in certain operations, and there are things that just don't need to be public knowledge across the board, we'll say. But I do think to do this properly, if you're going to have a chief of staff of sorts, they need to know what's under the hood for real.
Mm-hmm.
And it's made my life a lot easier. And I finished a meeting of this nature 30 seconds before we jumped on this call. And it's definitely top of mind. It's something that's discussed routinely. We talk about the budget on the regular, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Pete. I think that is the thing that I see gets in the way of people doing this on a regular basis, is that those 4 buckets, how you measure success in those 4 buckets is just not clear in the first place. So you can't teach someone to think like a manager or owner if you haven't made it clear what good revenue targets look like, what a budget for at least some areas of the business, maybe not compensation, but in terms of what we spend on office supplies. Like if you haven't made clear what the budget looks like, how do you teach them to care about expenses? Same thing with the client experience or team experience. If you haven't created a very clear measuring stick for this is what a good experience looks like here, it's hard to get them to think about it in a constructive way. So I think it's so smart to just, to think about, for those of you who are listening and are like, yeah, I want to do this. How do I do this? I think you start by creating really great terms of success and measuring sticks in those 4 categories. Then you can teach people how to think about it in the way that's useful for your business. But without that model, they're just going to need to be swinging for the fences. And it might need a little bit of a period of that until you figure it out. But ultimately, you should learn pretty quickly what's working and not working in all those areas. Yeah.
It occurs to me one other wrinkle to this I'll add that is just an interesting thought experiment. And we don't really have a way of knowing this. We know that it seemed anecdotally there was a lot of resonance with this topic when we shared it. And you're correct, Pete. It was shared through the lens of not the whole team, but specifically a number 2, a consigliere, a chief of staff. Because I do think even in a modest training gym, it is realistic and plausible for you to create that role, which has a lot of really important benefits for the business's success, for your team's well-being, and for your well-being as the owner. Having said that, one thing that is very interesting, because I have a lot of friends that do business coaching in an array of industries, and training gym owners are an interesting lot. And it's almost, they're entrepreneurs, so it's almost a product for businesses, but it's also almost a product for consumers. So one thing I wonder as a thought experiment, I just want to make space for it because I know we have people listening to this that maybe are newer on their path, is this might be the tool for you. Because I'm just sort of wondering out loud here, is this maybe, I perhaps have curse of knowledge and I'm assuming that, this is an intuitive, obvious thing for the owner that you can use as a teaching tool to train somebody else to help support you in running the business. And I'm wondering if for some of the individuals, maybe this was a useful thing for them because perhaps it's not always clear, particularly when someone is newer to the game. So as a very specific example, being able to prepare a budget and a set of KPIs that your consigliere becomes intimately aware with presupposes that you as the owner are very aware of your budget and your expenses and are tracking the numbers, right? And I just want to say to you, if you're listening to this and you're feeling a little bit overwhelmed and you want to create a second in command position, unless you feel like you yourself understand how to make more money, reduce expenses, make teams' lives better, it makes clients' lives better, and unless you yourself as the owner have developed even some basic, and believe me, if people work with the Unicorn Society, we are not making you do complicated math. This isn't anything that should be overwhelming. It should be simple, simple, simple. But unless you have a basic understanding of those KPIs and metrics, then it's going to be very difficult for people on your team to understand what winning looks like because you don't know yet.
Yeah. I think it's a great point. I think that's probably, if you said more clearly, I think what I was trying to get at, which is, you really got to be clear about this. You got to walk before you run, right? If you as the owner don't know how to do all these things, then, you can't really use this as a management tool yet. So I think that's really smart.
You can manage yourself with it, perhaps.
Yeah. Well, let's do this, my friends. I know we want to kind of keep this one a relatively short one and just introduce these ideas. So let's do some final thoughts about how our listeners can take this information and run with it. Pete.
My thought is that if you fall into the pool of individuals that Mark mentioned who feel like we just dumped a lot of info on you and you don't even know where to start with your numbers, an email to you, Michael, would be a good starting point because the thing about tracking KPI and getting your affairs in order is that designing the system can be scary. Designing it from scratch isn't necessary at this point.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
I mean,
you probably don't want to,
of
in
this
fact.
nature. Exactly. And concepts of this nature have been templated so that we can help people accelerate into a functional state where they're closer to adding that number two, or the sous chef, as I remember I've heard you call it in the past,
Yes.
sooner rather than later. So you're probably not as far as you think you are if this concept seems overwhelming.
Yeah, great. Yeah, I'll just jump in. The email is michael@businessforunicorns.com. Fisher, final thoughts and takeaways for our listeners.
I have to say this is why it's so joyful to teach, but also maddening is you just forget things. And I have to confess, I forgot. And I think this is a very important thing that I haven't really seen spoken about. And I haven't spent a lot of time really highlighting the importance of having a sous chef. That if you want to be the head chef of your gym, you're going to need some cooks. But even if you have a staff of 5 or 6, the only way as chef you can have, I think, some quality of life and the business can really thrive is developing a sous chef, right? And it's not probably realistic to have 4 tiers of management in most training gyms. But I think focusing first on the KPIs, I think we've sort of uncovered in this conversation is probably a first piece of this. This training tool, which is how we really started this conversation, these 4 things we want to teach the individual, but also just even the distinction as a training gym owner, wherever you're at in your journey, is if you don't have one, what needs to happen to move towards having one? And then also if you do have one, how can you utilize the tool to make them more effective? And then importantly, realize how important that position is in your business so that you're properly compensating, developing, and nurturing that individual financially and emotionally.
Yeah, great. Yeah, well said. I think it's a great reminder to a lot of us. I think my final thought here for our dear listeners who are just now starting to wrap their arms around their businesses, started to develop a team, started to think about the 4 things we listened. My suggestion to all of you is take one at a time. So we listed, understanding your revenue, understanding your expenses, improving your client experience, and improving your team experience. If you try to do all of them at the same time when you haven't really dialed in any of them, it's going to be a recipe for overwhelm and burnout. I would say start with one at a time. Spend a whole month focusing on one, then spend the next month focusing on it. In 4 months, then you'll have a good running draft for how you do all 4 of those things. But if you haven't really wrapped your arms around any of them yet, I would just really hesitate to dive all into all of them at the same time. So take one at a time, my friends. I think it'll be a more successful journey. All right, my friends, this was really fun. This was a great topic. I think it's high level enough to be titillating, using Mark's word from earlier, and I also think tactical enough to really result in like go do something about this. So bravo, my friends. Thanks again for the chat. Let's do it again soon.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Bye.
Well, I hope you loved today's podcast. And forgive me, I want to remind you one more time, if you haven't already done so, head over to businessforunicorns.com, click the button, and get your free self-assessment, the ultimate training gym owner report card. I promise you're going to want to dig into this resource and get the support you need, finding crystal clarity on exactly where you need to be focusing to create a life and a business you love.